Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our Wednesday morning weekly Tanya Shir. Today is, I'm supposed to start off with the date. Today is the 13th of Elul in the English, that is August 26th. We are just over 2 weeks to Rosh Hashanah. Hashem should bless us all with Aksivach Simatoiva, Lashana Tova Masuka, and all the most wonderful blessings for us and for all the Jews. All right. We're in chapter 13, we're in Perek Yud Gimel. If you have the lessons in Tanya, we are in the new print, we're on page 195. Which is 193 in the old print, by the words Ach me'achar sheharasha b'chol lasmoli. So what Alter Rebbe is teaching here, this is sort of an interesting spin or interesting addition, if you will, to this whole discussion of the Benoni, is that the Benoni really isn't seen as you know, we keep talking about the limited success that the Benoni has over in wrestling with his own nefesh habamis, with their own yetzer hara, right? They don't manage to conquer the intellect and the emotional part. Excuse me. But at least in thought, speech, and action, the Benoni has mastered. There's an element of mastery here. We keep talking about this. So the Alter Rebbe here puts a sort of bit more of a spin on it. He says, actually, what happens is not quite that the Benoni is successful in conquering the Nefesh Habamis in this sense. What happens really is just that there is this special siyata dishmaya, there is this special help from the Rabbanu Shalom that moves in, that facilitates this victory for the Benoni. Right? The Alter Rebbe says, it's not that the Benoni himself has this control. It's rather by the Benoni, the Nefesh Elokis and the Nefesh Habamis, they're like two judges that lock horns. They oppose each other in this court setting, in this hearing. And you always need a machriya. You always need a third voice, an objective party, a third one that will come in and reconcile between the two of Alocha Kedivrei HaMachriya. Hu HaKadosh Baruch Hu, HaIsrael HaYetzer Tov. Actually, there's a special, siyata d'shmaya that sets in from above that helps. And that's really what pushes the Benoni over the finish line here. Even as far as machshava dibur ma'aseh, the thought, speech, and action, it's really a special divine siyata d'shmaya that gives the Benoni this success. Otherwise, actually, you wouldn't be able to. You wouldn't be able, even this type of victory over the Nefesh Habamis, you wouldn't be able to have. Unlike the tzaddik who actually conquers the Nefesh Habamis, right? So this is now another difference. And besides for the fact, in other words, in the normal circumstances, we understand that a tzaddik's victory is complete. Totally, actually kills his Nefesh Habamis or even transforms it. Whereas a Benoni, the victory is incomplete. It's only in thought, speech, and action. Alter Rebbe says, even in thought, speech, and action, it's not really the Nefesh Elokis which is victorious over the Nefesh Habamis. It's not really how it works. Rather, the Nefesh Elokis exerts all its koyach, all its strength, and it sort of locks horns, if you will, with the Nefesh Habamis, and they oppose each other with the full force that they can. After that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu needs to step in and put his divine finger on the scale and tip it, toward the side of the Yetzer Tov, which Hashem does. Ilmolei HaKadosh Baruch Hu oizro ein yochele. This is what Alter Rebbe explains here in Perek Yud Gimel of Tanya. It reminds me of, I was going to share with you a quick story, then we'll learn inside. It reminds me of a great story that my father repeated. My father's Zoltan Gesund. About a dinner that they once made to honor a shliach after X amount of years of his work on behalf of the Chabad house, about the city, the community, whatever it was. And he'd been incredibly successful for quite a while. And to honor him, they made him a special dinner. And you know how it works at these Jewish dinners. They have a lot of speeches. And of course, the dinner is to honor the shliach, so everybody's talking about the shliach. And the first speaker gets up and says, this shliach is amazing. He's really, he's accomplished tremendous things. And the second speaker gets up and says, this shliach is amazing. He's really a great scholar. And the third one says, and he's a great visionary. And the fourth one says, and he's a chveisvas, he's a Noy of Yisrael. And everybody's getting up and extolling the virtues of the shliach. And the shliach, of course, is getting uncomfortable because he's a Hasidic Yid. And he's uncomfortable with all of these accolades and all of this talk about how amazing he is. Doesn't like it. So when it's his turn to speak, he gets up and he says, none of this is true. I'm not a visionary. I'm not a scholar. I'm not hardworking. None of this is, he goes, you got the wrong guy. It's not me. So what's the deal? So what's this whole dinner to honor you? What's this whole dinner to honor me? What's it all for? He says, the only thing you can give me, he says, I'm a shliach of the Rebbe. That's it. Everything that happened here, all the success, and this is all, the Rebbe did this. So what about this big dinner to honor me? He says, well, the only thing you can give me credit for is that I didn't disturb the Rebbe's powers from working through me. I didn't get in the way. I'm a Baal Bechira. I have free choice. I could have interfered. I could have gotten in the way. I didn't. You can give me credit. I didn't get in the way. Men, in moments of honesty, will sometimes say to each other, my greatest accomplishment in life is I didn't get in the way of my wife educating my children. My children, Baruch Hashem, all grew up to be mentioned, to be decent, contributing to society, human beings. This is to my wife's credit, not me. The only thing I managed to do was work long enough hours and stay out of the house long enough, just, provide for the family and just get out of the way. So when men say that, they're usually, they're being a bit hyperbolic. But this shliach meant it seriously. He goes, look, everything that happened here, everything that we're celebrating, it's all, the Rebbe takes all the credit. The only thing that you'll give me, the only thing I take credit for is I didn't disturb the Rebbe's koichas from working through me. So my father likes to say that, of course, whereas the community was just flabbergasted by the shliach's humility. I mean, talk about a scholar and a caring person and hardworking and a visionary and et cetera. But Enoch, he's humble also. They gave him a standing ovation and everybody doubled their pledges and it was a great day for Chabad, Baruch Hashem. But there was also an Alter Chassid, whoever it was, either a Mendel Futterfass or somebody like that, who watched the whole thing. And afterwards, when they sat down to Farbrengs, so the older Chassid said to him, he said, I just want you to know, I've never met anybody more arrogant than you. Never, such yeshes, such gaiva. Oof, I've never seen anything like it. Why? What did I do wrong? Well, I forget. I said it wasn't me, it was the Rebbe, it was that. He said, so the Chassid said to him, this that you said it wasn't you, of course that's true. This that you said that it was the Rebbe's koichas, of course that's true. That wasn't the problem. So what's the problem? He said, you had the chutzpah to stand up there and say, I didn't disturb the Rebbe's koichas from working through me. Wow, that's like arrogance on the next blessed level. I mean, talk about the success. Talk about the success going to your head. Get a grip, pal. I mean, you're losing yourself. To say that you didn't disturb the Rebbe's koichas, of course you disturbed the Rebbe's. Of course, you disturbed the Rebbe's koichas from working through you. If you hadn't disturbed the Rebbe's koichas from working through you, they would be 1,000 times more, infinitely more successful. All right? What about this big dinner to honor the guy? We agreed he's no scholar. We agreed he's no visionary. We agreed the success is not for him. It's not attributed to him. It's all attributed to the Rebbe. He can't even take the credit for not disturbing the Rebbe's koichas from working through him because, of course, he did. So what? So the Elter Chassid said to him, you only disturbed the Rebbe's koichas from working through you 99%, not 100%. The 1% that you didn't disturb, the Rebbe's koichas came through you, and that's where you were successful. It's a very classic sort of Lubavitch Chabad, story that sheds light on many things, but it sheds light on how we don't let ourselves and let each other get away with arrogance, not even on a sophisticated level, how seriously we take this issue of bittul. But the reason why I'm saying it here is because when you study this part of the chapter superficially, it sounds like the Alter Rebbe is weakening the Benoni. In other words, not only is the Benoni unable to be victorious over his nefesh habamis in the realm of intellect and emotion, and his victory is restricted to thought, speech, and action. The Alter Rebbe is saying, even in thought, speech, and action, it's not really he who's victorious. It's not really his yetzer, his nefesh elikis, which is victorious. In the end, he needs a special siyata d'shmaya. In Moli HaKadosh Baruch Hu Oizroi, Hashem has to set in there, has to come in there. Halacha kedivrei hamachriya, and the Rabbanu Shloim has to see to it that the nefesh elikis wins and not the nefesh habamis. Okay, so then what? So what does the Benoni take credit for? What does the Benoni? If we're going to make a dinner to honor the Benoni, so what are we going to honor the Benoni for? Not for the Seichel Midas, for sure not, and not Machshava Dibur Ma'isa, also not, because it's not he that's victorious in the end. It's Hashem. Right, or it's Hashem siyata d'shmaya, and the answer I believe here is the deeper perspective on this is actually that the Alter Rebbe is not putting down the Benoni. On the contrary, we're elevating him to a higher level. He's a keli. He's a conduit to the siyata d'shmaya, perhaps in a way that, like we mentioned last week, that even a tzaddik doesn't get. Right, because again, a tzaddik reaches some level of perfection, not, God forbid, actual perfection, but at some level, a tzaddik reaches completion. A tzaddik, there's some element of mastery in the realm of a tzaddik. By a Benoni, there isn't. There's just struggle. There's just painful struggle. And Alter Rebbe was saying, amazingly, ironically, it's that painful struggle that refines the Benoni, that makes him a conduit, that the siyata d'shmaya and HaKadosh Baruch Hu Oizroi should be manifest, should filter through the Benoni, dafke in this state. Okay. But even as the Benoni experiences this siyata d'shmaya and HaKadosh Baruch Hu Oizroi, Hashem helps him, again, it never changes him. It never allows the Benoni to actually graduate, and become an actual tzaddik. He doesn't. He remains perpetually, if you will, stuck in this place where HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to constantly help him and facilitate his victory over the nefesh habamis. The Rebbe brings here in the Rebbe's commentary on Tanya, the Rebbe brings here the famous story in the Gemara about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. That Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the Gemara says he passed away at the age of 120 when he was on his deathbed. Very famous, Masech the Brachas Daf Chav Ches Amud Beis. When he was on his deathbed, his Talmidim came in to see him, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai saw them, and he started crying. And his Talmidim asked him, but bottom line, his Talmidim asked him, why are you crying? And he said he's crying because he doesn't know any idea be'ezeh derech ma'ilichinois. He doesn't know which path he's being led upon. He says, I see two paths before me. Am I going to Gan Eden or am I going to Gehenna? Very famous, right? And the Rebbe talked about this on numerous occasions. How could it be that after all is said and done, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai didn't know if he was going to Gan Eden or if he was going to Gehenna? How could it be? All sorts of explanations, right? The Rebbe liked very much the explanation that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was busy. He was busy. He was so busy. He didn't have time to think about himself. He didn't have time to think about himself. He was busy. He was busy teaching. He was busy. Every day he woke up, he didn't say to himself, how can I become greater? How can I grow? It wasn't about him. At the end of the day, on his deathbed, he said, wait a second, how deep did my own avodas Hashem go? How deeply, what's going on with me, myself? And until this point, he never had the opportunity to honestly assess himself. He was too busy. But the reason why the Rebbe brings it here is because we have a similar concept here with the Benoni, where the Benoni is engaged in the avodah. He's engaged constantly in this battle between the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara, and he never really gets the sort of, like Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who never got a moment to sit back in his life and go, hey, look at that, I'm a tzaddik. the Benoni never gets that. Okay, in Rabbi Yochanan Zakai's case, he really was. In the case of a Benoni, he really isn't. But the idea is that the Benoni keeps this, right? The Benoni never really gets to experience this type of success. He always remains, he always remains engaged in this avodah. Now we're going to learn, Alter Rebbe says, the truth is that even somebody who's an actual tzaddik, even somebody who really is a tzaddik, they should also always still consider themselves a rasha, or consider themselves like a Benoni, meaning to say that they need to constantly remain on guard, and that their success in their battle against the Nefesh Abamis should never be perceived as something that they mastered, but rather always something that comes to them milamayla, something that comes to them from the Eberstein. A thought is crossing my head as I'm saying this. I'm just going to mention it quickly. It's my own connection. If I'm wrong, may Hashem forgive me. But I want to articulate this, and then we'll continue learning inside. We know, of course, that Chassidus talks extensively about the fact that Hashem's creation of the world was not a one-time experience. Hashem didn't create the world once, and then after that, the world remains in existence on its own. Rather, Hashem needs to recreate the world every single second again and over again. And if Hashem were to stop, the world would cease to exist. Okay. The simple explanation for that, in other words, it's not a simple concept, but the initial understanding of that is Chassidus wants us to know that Gashmius, materialism, it's not a very sturdy existence. In fact, it's not a true existence. It's not a real existence at all, right? Lahavdil, like a person who is being kept alive by machines, right? There's the machines are pumping the heart and pumping the lungs and keeping the person alive. So technically the person is alive, but basically they're on life support. So in other words, the person's not really alive. They're just it's the machines that are really pumping the person. So the Chassidus says, when we look at the simple understanding of this, when we look around in the physical world, we go, okay, so what are you getting this ball? What are you getting excited about over a big wide world? It's here today, it's gone tomorrow, and even today, every single second Hashem is recreated. If Hashem were to stop for a second, the world would cease to exist. Very famous. Okay. So in other words, on a simple level, the idea is to say that Gashmius, physical and materialism, it's not a real existence. It's nothing to get excited about. But Chassidus says there's a deeper explanation, there's a deeper vort. Because the reality is that Hashem does not let the physical existence slip away and cease to exist. Hashem does keep recreating it every single second. So you can argue that it's not a true existence, that it's not a real existence, but you can't argue that it doesn't exist. It exists. Hashem keeps it in existence. Chassidus says, yeah, but there's a much deeper vort. The much deeper vort is not to say because Hashem keeps it in existence every single second and it doesn't exist on its own, therefore it's not a true existence. That's not the vort. The vort in the end is that it is a true existence, but it's a true godly existence. In other words, it exists. In the end, the vort is not that Gashmias doesn't exist, because it does. In the end, the vort is that Gashmias exists because Gashmias expresses a lakus. Because the lakus is true, because the lakus is real, and the lakus is recreating it, investing in it, and pumping it every single second. So the depth of the truth of a physical existence is the godly reality of Hashem Echad. All right, we learned this at length when we learned Sharichot V'Emunah, but this is a general idea. I'm applying this. This is my own application. If I'm wrong, may Hashem forgive me. I'm applying this a little bit to the world of the Benoni. Where the Alter Rebbe says, look, in the world of the tzaddik, the tzaddik is like something that you create once, and once you create, it exists on its own. The tzaddik mastered his own nefesh abamis, he mastered his own Yetzer Hara, he transformed it, he killed it, he did what he had to do. Now the tzaddik functions as an existence. The Benoni doesn't. The Benoni is a mess. The Benoni is a wreck. He's got his Yetzer Tov and his Yetzer Hara locked in confrontation, in complete tension. By the Benoni, the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara have paralyzed each other to the point that nobody can move. Now what happens now? HaKadosh Baruch Hu steps in. HaKadosh Baruch Hu steps in and sees to it that the Yetzer Tov should win. Ki yisr na'or min ha'choshech, like light overpowers darkness. So if that's the case, in the case of the Benoni, the depth, right, like the Gashmias, that on a deeper level is really the Dvar Hashem, or Chassidim would repeat very famously at the end of the Alter Rebbe's life. The Alter Rebbe was in the attic of his own home, and he called over somebody, maybe one of his grandchildren, I don't remember who it was. And he pointed to a beam in the house, and he said, "What do you see?" And the grandson said, "I see a beam." And the Alter Rebbe said, "And I see the word of Hashem that's keeping the beam in existence." Right? In the beginning of Torah Shalom, in the Rebbe Rashab, in the book of the Rebbe Rashab Sichas, it says there that the Rebbe Rashab once in the middle of a Farbrengen asked for a plate, and he was going to show the Chassidim that it isn't really a plate, it's really the word of Hashem that's keeping the plate into existence. He wanted to show this to everybody, and at some point, I guess, he looked around and he saw that people wouldn't be able to handle it, they would kind of go out of their minds, so he sort of changed his mind. But the idea was that he was going to show this to them, in the physical reality. So the Benoni, the life, becomes the story becomes not one of victory where he's overcome, because victory is a one-time experience, and then what? Now you're victorious. The word is a keli to the Eibashter, who's constantly oimed limin evyon lo yishia mishoyf denafsh, to constantly save. Okay, page 193. Page 195. Ach me'achar shorasha b'chol lasmoli b'bein ubetok foy kesoiladotoi. Since, however, on the inside, as far as the temptations, as far as the what's it called, the impulses, right, of the Benoni, then the nefesh abamis, the Yetzer Hara, is just as strong as it always was, as strong as it was when he was born. To lust and to crave after all the pleasures of the world. Unlike a tzaddik, at least even a tzaddik she'eino gomer, where his nefesh abamis is nullified, is overwhelmed by the nefesh elokis, or and it's then in the case of the Benoni, it's not nullified, it's not overwhelmed by the goodness of the nefesh abamis, it hasn't been pushed away at all. It's just that it doesn't have the control to take hold in the physical limbs of the body in thought, speech, and action. Again, not because of the Benoni, because of the Eibashter ha'omed limin evyon, who stands on the right side of the impoverished one. In this case, the impoverished one is the Benoni. And helps the nefesh elokis l'chein nikra kerosha. Therefore, the Benoni is called kerosha. Like the rabbi said in the quote at the beginning of Tanya, even if the whole world tells you you're a tzaddik, you should consider yourself kerosha. V'loi rosha mamish, not an actual rosha. Chas v'sholem. He should consider himself a Benoni. Why is a Benoni called kerosha? So again, stop an average person in the street. Why is a Benoni called kerosha? He'll tell you, because although the Benoni has control b'machshava dibur ma'aseh, but it's only b'machshava dibur ma'aseh. In his midas, in his seichel, deep down, the Benoni is just the same as the nefesh abamis is just as strong as it is by a Russia. But that's not the truth. That's not the extent of it. I'll be saying more than that. Even b'machshava dibur ma'aseh, where the Benoni does have success, the success in the end is not properly attributed to the Benoni. Because the Benoni in his own wouldn't be. The Benoni, even b'machshava dibur ma'aseh, wouldn't be able to be successful. If not for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who stands there to save him from his own nefesh abamis, even b'machshava dibur ma'aseh, he wouldn't be successful. So Alter Rebbe says that's why in Chazal he's called Kirosha, like a Rosha, meaning to say he basically is the Rosha, just that he merits the Siyata Deshmaya of Hashem. Hashem protects him. Again, I'm going to repeat myself again. When we say Hashem protects him on a superficial level, it sounds shallow. So what? So he's a Rosha, but Hashem protects him? Yeah, on a deeper level, there's a quality there that's greater than a tzaddik. Because again, in the case of the tzaddik, the success is attributed to him. In the case of the Benoni, the success is not attributed to him, it's attributed to the Eibashter. The Benoni's success is that he makes himself a conduit for the help of the Eibashter. Sometimes in life, a person gets stuck in a particular situation. They feel within themselves, I don't have the power to overcome this. So now what? So now the person says, okay, Rabbanu Shalom, help me. It's a place of tremendous humility. So this is the place where the Benoni is, and this is the deeper meaning, says the Alter Rebbe, of the saying of the Chazal, that even if the whole world tells you you're a tzaddik, you should consider yourself kirosha, meaning like a Benoni. And not to believe the world. Don't believe the world. That say to you, don't believe the world tells you, you must be a tzaddik. After all, look how you control your nefesh abamis. You must have gotten rid of it. No. It should be in his own eyes. The person should never accept this. Person should, right, like Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, should never say, okay, I must be a tzaddik. No. How do I know? Perhaps deep down, or not just perhaps, the person should say, inside, deep in my heart, the negativity of the nefesh abamis is there, just like it was before. In that sense, nothing has changed. None of the initial power, of the inclination of the nefesh abamis has been weakened or gone away. The Adarab, here the Alter Rebbe adds something scary. Not only that, not only should a person not assume that because of their success b'machshava dibur u'maisa, this must mean that deep down they have conquered their own nefesh abamis. Not only should they assume that the nefesh abamis is just as strong, Adarab, it's even stronger. It turns out that the nefesh abamis becoming stronger is like a person gaining weight. My own mashal, right? What does a person need to do in order to gain weight? The answer is nothing. Just let your guard down, and the person will gain weight. Maybe it's just me. What does a person do in order to lose weight? For this, as a rule, you need to fight. You need to fight you need to exercise and eat healthy and resist temptation over and over and over again. But left to our vices, we will just doing our thing. The body will accumulate and store, right? The Rambam says very famously, quoted from the Gemara, I believe, that 900 out of 1,000 deaths, 999, if I remember correctly, the Rambam says, 999 of them are from overeating, which is wild, because what were they already eating in the times of the Rambam? They didn't have the types of stuff we have today, and yet I don't think they had sushi or pizza or stuff like that. So only God knows. I mean, they were probably starving to death without sushi and pizza. May Hashem protect us. But be it as it may, still the Rambam says 999 people die from overeating. Because it doesn't take concentration, right? What does the person do in order to become lazy, in order to develop bad habits? What's the answer? Nothing. Just don't, by default, don't resist, don't fight your own nature, and you'll develop bad habits. Says the Alter Rebbe, the default setting, this is the word. The default setting is that with time, not just the nefesh abamis stays the same, the nefesh abamis becomes stronger. The more a person lives a physical life and functions in a physical sense, eating and drinking and all the other pursuits of this physical world, which a person al pi Torah and al pi halacha is obligated to engage in. Just the very physical life, by virtue of the fact that it's physical, emboldens the nefesh abamis, and emboldens the nefesh alakis. It emboldens the nefesh abamis. So a person should never look at himself, says the Alter, even a Benoni, should never look at himself and go, look at this. I must have achieved some level of victory over my own nefesh habahamis. No. No. Instead, a person should say, I'm a Benoni. Afilu kol ha'olam kuloi. Right? I remember when we studied Tanya for the first time, our Tanya teacher said, what do you mean, Afilu kol ha'olam kuloi? Since when is kol ha'olam kuloi? What's kol ha'olam kuloi? Sunset, Hollywood, chveis. Well, what's kol ha'olam kuloi? Kol ha'olam kuloi doesn't mean the physical world. Kol ha'olam kuloi means the ruchniistic world, right? Looks at a person and says, looks at a Benoni and says, look at your incredible success. Amazing. And the truth is, it really is amazing. And yet at no stage, says the Alter Rebbe, should the person allow this to be perceived as a psak din, they shouldn't allow it to see themselves branded in this way. I must be a person who's achieved some internal success, right? The Davar Gashmi, like a Davar Gashmi, should never go, well, I must exist. I existed yesterday, I existed the day before. Means I must exist today too. Nonsense. It's only, you should consider yourself a Benoni who is kept here constantly by the Siyata Dishmaya, by the Eibashter, constantly pumping divine energy into our spiritual situation. And if we were to falter or slip for a moment, we would fall. All right, the Alter Rebbe goes on to discuss a different point. As far as reading from the inside, I want to stop over here. But I want to conclude with a vort. I want to conclude with a vort from the Rebbe. Very powerful. On numerous occasions, the Rebbe said every morning when we say the morning brachas, part of the morning brachas are the words "V'al tevayenu l'dei nisayon," which means we daven to Hashem that Hashem should not bring us to a situation that will test us, that will challenge us. And the Rebbe liked to highlight the fact that this tefillah "Al tevayenu l'dei nisayon," because it's in the brachas, is recited by everybody, even a person who's a tzaddik. And even in the Rebbe's Lashon, a person who's a tzaddik, and they've lived for 119 years, 364 days, etc., etc. They've lived as a tzaddik, and they've never failed, never faltered. And they wake up on the morning of their 120th birthday, right? And everybody's wishing them have a great day. And they pick up a siddur daven in the morning and say, Al tevayenu l'dei nisayon. What? Al tevayenu l'dei nisayon? What? You haven't had a nefesh habahamis, you haven't had a Yetzor in God knows how long. Al tamin ba'atzmach ad yoim moisach, you don't believe in yourself. A person never sees themselves as an individual who's graduated. Never graduated. Now again, on the one hand, there's the word there where it's like, don't let your success get to your head. Right? You never know. The Yetzer Hara is constantly devious and constantly looking and constantly waiting for ways to make a person vulnerable and to catch them somewhere. I mentioned this on the Shabbos Shir. Maybe some of you were there, right? That the Rebbe highlighted the idea that Mishnah says a Kohen Gadol is not allowed to sit on the Beis Din that decides whether there would be an extra Adar that year or not. Once upon a time, this was decided before the calendar. This was decided on an annual basis. If there would be a Niber Yor, an extra Adar. The Kohen Gadol was not allowed to sit on it. Why? The Gemara says he was Negei B'Dover. He was subjective. It affected him. Why? Because if there was an extra Adar, then when Yom Kippur would come around, it would be a little bit colder. And because he had to toivel in the mikveh on Yom Kippur, and it would be a little bit colder, so he had a vested interest in seeing to it that there not be an extra Adar, so Yom Kippur would be earlier, deeper in the summer, and warmer. So the Kohen Gadol was affected personally, so he wasn't a kosher judge. And the Rebbe said, do you understand what's going on here? We're talking about the Kohen Gadol. We're talking about on Yom Kippur. We're talking about Sach HaKol, just a couple of degrees, barely a couple of degrees, one way or the other. And you're telling me we're concerned the Kohen Gadol is going to pervert the Psak Din here because he's personally biased, because he doesn't want the mikveh to be colder? And the answer is exactly right. Yes. Once a person is subjective, they're subjective, doesn't matter. You could be the Kohen Gadol, B'Yom HaKippurim, going to the mikveh to purify yourself, to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. A kalta mikveh is a kalta mikveh. It's uncomfortable. That's the simple pshat. Al Tavenu l'dei nisayon means a person who could have success for 119 years and 364 days, and the final 365th day, a person can fail. Al tamen ba'atzmach ad yom Mosach. But again, there's a deeper word. Al tamen ba'atzmach ad yom al tavenu l'dei nisayon means the person says, I don't take credit. The credit for this avoid doesn't go to me. I'm not the master of this. There's always a siyata d'shmaya. There's always Hashem's help that kicks in. And in order to continuously be zoicha, to merit that help, a person needs to remain in a state of bittul, openness to the siyata d'shmaya. And for this, one needs to constantly realize that they cannot take credit for their own success. The Rebbe was once speaking about a particular issue that was relevant in Crown Heights. And actually, I don't mind saying what it was. This was the Rebbe's position that when people sell houses in Crown Heights, they shouldn't sell them to Goyim. They should sell them to Yid. And the Rebbe said it's based on halacha, etc. So the Rebbe once said at a Fabrengen that he received a letter or a message that people were saying that the Rebbe may have shifted his position on this, right? In other words, because he hadn't spoken about it for a couple of years, so people said, well, the Rebbe didn't speak about it for a few years. Maybe it must be that he changed his mind, or he changed his position on it. So the Rebbe said, I didn't change my position on it, and it doesn't make sense for me to change my position on it. It doesn't make sense to say that because I didn't speak about something for a few years, I mean, I should change my position on it. And then the Rebbe said, it's the halakha, nothing to do with me. And then he said like this, the Rebbe said, the Mishnah says, Al tamen ba'atzmach ad yom Mosach, which means you cannot believe in yourself till the day you die. A person is always vulnerable to make mistakes. The Rebbe said, but in this, when it comes to paskening halacha, I'm 100% sure that I'm not going to make any mistakes. How can you say such a thing when the Mishnah says, don't believe in yourself? The Rebbe said, because I remain in the schus of my iskashut, because I remain connected. The Rebbe said the Rebbe would talk about his Rebbe, the Friedeker Rebbe. In the schus of that iskashus, I'm confident, I'm sure that I'm not vulnerable to making mistakes. In other words, the idea here is that the siyata d'shmaya that the person opens themselves up to keeps them protected in a way that is beyond anything possible on a human level. It is this idea that we're referring to when we say, and a person can look around and say, the whole world tells me I'm a tzaddik, I must be a tzaddik. And maybe you are. Chazal said, but always view yourself as a Benoni who experiences success only in the zchus of the siyata d'shmaya, not by virtue of themselves. All right, we'll stop over here and we'll continue next week. Be'ezus Hashem. In Perek Yud Gimel of Tanya. Thank you for being here. Everybody have a ksiva v'chasima taiva.